So before we jump in, we just wanted to let you all know we are aiming to make our racial equity statement a living document that drives our work. To heal the harm that racism has caused in the food system, we urge participants to act as allies to our BIPOC communities. I am from Central Massachusetts, which is Nipmuc Nation. If you all don't know the native land that you are occupying now, we encourage you to go to native-land.ca and find out who the native folks were who occupied the land that you are on now. And you can put that in the chat if you know it or if you research it along the way. We welcome you to introduce yourself and also list the land that you are currently occupying. So we'd like to acknowledge all of the sponsors that support our conference and allow us to put this on for everyone. These sponsors have contributed, and we would ask you to, if you are going to investigate companies, to take a look at these sponsors and support them and let them know that you appreciate their support of NOFA Mass so that we can continue educating and advocating for organic agriculture in Massachusetts and the surrounding areas. So today we have Kat, Chang, I should have asked you to make sure I'm pronouncing your last name right, Kat, but you can correct me, Laznicka and Peter Laznicka. They are co-owners and of Reed Farm in Sunderland, Massachusetts. And I'm gonna go ahead and allow them to elaborate on that and get started.
Hello everyone, I'm Kat. I use she, her pronouns. And this is Peter. He uses he, him pronouns. So we are Reed Farm. We're located in Sunderland. This is a little bit about us. We're a small-scaled pastured poultry farm. Sunderland, Massachusetts, once occupied by Nipmuc, Wabanaki Confederacy, and the Pecumtuck, I believe. We are a small enterprise state-inspected poultry processing facility. And in the next year or two, we are planning to upgrade to USDA. We're a full-service custom poultry processing place. So we process for most of the people that sell chicken around in the area. And backyard growers as yourselves. I believe if you're here, you're planning to raise some meat chickens. And we offer year-round wholesale pastured poultry. Pastured, we are in New England, so our pasture is not pasture in the winter. So they are in hoop houses over the winter, but the rest of the time they're out on pastured for feed. So this is what we're going to be talking about today. It's just like an overview slide. It's basics of raising meat chickens for your own freezer. We're going to talk about choosing breeds. We'll touch a little bit on other poultry like turkeys, waterfowl, quail, guineas, but mostly we're going to be talking about chicken, and that's what we raise ourselves. We did just get one batch of ducks to try, so we hope to do more of that in the future, but mostly we'll be talking about chickens. We'll talk about raising them, different ideas for housing, what kinds of equipment and materials you'll want to have, feed and water. Most importantly, I want to talk about having a processing plan. We often have people who reach out to us maybe a couple weeks before they want their chickens to be processed. And there are very few processors in the state. So it's really important to have your processing plan earlier in place. We recommend that people try to reserve their date when they get confirmation of the shipment date of their birds. So really at least 2 months in advance. And then we'll talk a little bit about packing and storage. This is an overview timeline for planning for your meat chickens. There aren't precise dates because every factor that you decide on will change what those dates are. So for Cornish cross, which is what we raise, they take about 8 weeks before you harvest them. So based on that, we'll reverse engineer when we're going to process them and all that kind of planning. Peter, did you have anything to add on this part?
Nope.
So you'll want to think about when do you want to have your chickens by, and then about how many you'd like to have. So this will change based on your needs. If you have a larger family or you have friends who are going to help you, you might want to get more. During this process, it's good to loop in your processor.
Or if you're doing it yourself, get all the supplies.
Or if you're doing it yourself, you want to make sure you can get all those supplies. What else was I going to say about this part? Oh, so depending on who you process with, they may have different price brackets, which might affect how many chickens you decide to raise. So if you raise 1 to 10, it's one price for us specifically, I mean. And the more you raise, the lower the price will be per bird. So that might affect your batch size. You might have originally said, oh, I just want 20 chickens to last me through the year. And then you find out that, oh, if I raise more than 25, I actually get a price break. So maybe you want to raise a couple more. So those are all things to consider when you're deciding the size of your batch. Oh, I thought I saw a question. I didn't. It's a little weird to be talking to just names. Let's see. So you've decided how many you want to raise, you've decided your breed, and then we're going to go into breed a little more. You've talked to your processor, and then we're also going to talk about the basics of raising a flock. And I'm not sure what the experience spread level is in this group. So maybe you've raised layers, but there are some differences when it comes to meat chickens. Okay, next slide, please. So talking about breeds. So like I mentioned, we raise Cornish cross. They are a meat chicken, dedicated meat chicken. So they're very efficient at converting feed to basically meat so that you get more meat out of each chicken, and they grow quite quickly. Other options for chickens are heritage or dual purpose.
Freedom Ranger, Kosher King.
Freedom Rangers, Kosher Kings.
Those are more towards the meat side, and then dual purpose is the bigger layers.
Right. The thing about dual purpose or layers that you then harvest for meat is depending on the breed, a lot of them hit probably their max egg laying rate at around 2 years, and then they decline. And 2 years is quite old for a chicken that you're then going to eat. So those are things to think about. How important is the meat to you? How important is getting eggs first? Anything else you want to add about dual purpose and heritage? You won't get as much breast meat out of a heritage or dual purpose bird as you will out of a Cornish cross.
But the legs will be similar size.
The legs should be
There's a lot
similar.
of leg meat, yeah.
No questions, great. So other poultry you may want to raise for meat are turkeys. We process a lot of turkeys around Thanksgiving, as you can imagine. Again, it's very important to reserve your date much earlier than you might think.
For turkeys, there's the broad-breasted white, the broad-breasted bronze, and those are the commercial breeds that grow fast and big. And then there's heritage breeds, which almost can fly, and they're smaller and take a lot longer.
They take quite a bit longer.
Almost the same amount of food.
Then there's your waterfowl, ducks and geese. Like I mentioned, this picture here you're seeing there is our first batch. I just took that photo yesterday. So we're going to give a batch of ducks a try. They're different in terms of raising and processing because they're waterfowl.
They make a mess.
They love the water, so they will go through water much faster than your chickens will. And then on the processing end, because they're waterfowl, it's trickier to pluck them. You have to time it right. So that's another thing. If you go to a processor that's not yourselves, you'll want to coordinate with them and ask them about it. We're not currently offering custom processing for ducks, but we hope to in the future. We're figuring it out right now.
So if you do raise ducks, you either want to get male or female because the pin feathers come in at a different age. So then you process them at 14 weeks or 7 weeks for ducks or 12 and a half weeks. There's 2 windows there where they won't have the pin feathers, but the males and females have different windows in that approximate time. So what you do is you pick up a duck and you ruffle its feathers, and that's how you can find if there's pin feathers. And for geese, they have a longer window.
Yeah, and those pin feathers are what's really tricky to pluck. And so that's why you want to time it so that when you you want to use a wax to pluck them. And then that way the wax will grab it all and you'll be able to pluck them cleanly.
And then for raising, the more space you give the birds, the better. We do anywhere from, I think it's 2 to 8 square feet, depending on the age of the bird. When they're in the brooder, they have less space, and they don't really need that much space in the brooder. But as they get bigger, you just want to give them more and more space.
Right, because in the brooder, you'll be heating the space for them because they'll want it nice and toasty. And so the smaller that space is, the easier it will be to heat and to maintain that heat. I think we should touch a little bit on how people can decide how many to raise in the space they have. How much was it per chicken?
The minimum you want to do is like 2 square feet per bird.
Per bird.
For the brooder, half a square foot a bird for the first week is okay. So if you have like a box to keep them in for 10, that's okay.
And I've raised my own meat chickens in a backyard before Reed Farm. And what we did was we just converted a shed, and that's what they were shut in at night, and then we let them out to pasture on the grass within some electric netting perimeter. And that's how I raised meat chickens before the scale that we're at now. So those are in my hand on that left picture are the eggs. You can see one is like starting to get that shell layer, but it's still quite soft. And then the next picture there is a meat chicken. And I didn't have a picture of a heritage breed. I think there's one later in our, what I've done is at the end is about breeds. So now we are preparing for chicks or ducklings or what have you. All these photos are Cornish cross. These are our own birds that we've raised over the past year or so. So the things that you'll want to get ready for when you're expecting chicks is the brooder and then your housing. Those are 2 different things. If you've never raised chickens from day olds, the brooder is a smaller space that's quite warm because the little chicks don't have their feathers yet. So they need a lot of warmth before you can put them out into their regular housing.
There's more pictures.
There are more pictures in the next one. I just had to throw in the very cute chick pictures. So in the middle there, that is a 3 to 5 day old chick in my hand, and I have small hands. And then the picture next to that on the very right, excuse me, is a 3-week-old chick. So Cornish cross grow quickly. And they're just so adorable when they're fluffy. So on the next slide, we'll go more into housing on the brooder. So I've included here examples of what we brood at the top. Those photos are our brooder. The one on the left is our duck brooder that now has ducklings in it. And then on the right, those are our chicks. And so you can see we use a large commercial brooder. Brooder we use interchangeably, right? We use the word brooder for the heat source and also for the space.
Well, there's brooder panels, which is just a heat panel that the chicks go close to stay warm. And then there's heat bulbs, which is a 250 watt red bulb, and that's good for about 50 birds. And then we use propane, which propane's nice because you don't need power. So if you don't have a spot where you could have power, then propane's really the only option.
Our hoop, so this is in the hoop house now since it's winter time, and it's quite far from our barn at our farm. So that's why we have the propane to power or fuel these large heat, I call them kind of heat shields. I don't know what the actual word is for them.
This brooder's right in the pasture. So it's in the field. The chicks just run out of it when they're ready. The less you can move them, the better they are as far as like crating them up and moving them to another location. So if you can brood them right where they're going to live, that's ideal.
In the lower left photo is my setup at home for our smaller batches of chickens, I'll say. And so that red light, you can see just very edge of the metal sort of dish that covers the heat bulb, and it gives off that red light. And so I've brooded them in this example in a large black tote that I got at Home Depot. I think it's like the biggest one they have. And it just, I lined it with some paper towel. And then as they get a little bit bigger, then I added some shavings. And yeah, so yeah, that's how I brooded them at home. And if you have a small enough batch and can fit them in there. What I have in there right now, what was that, 16 layers? Those are 16 layers in there.
And the foam insulation sheets make really good walls, but just don't use the pink insulation stuff because the chickens will eat it. We found out that the hard way.
Yeah.
So in that picture, you can see the, what is it, silver lining in the big brooder. That's so they don't eat the walls.
So yeah, you want to think about that. Chicks are really curious, and they'll peck and try to eat everything.
And then in that picture, they're close to the heater. You want to have different heat zones. So right under that heater is too warm, so they're in a ring around it. But then there's a cold zone further away, so the chicks can self-regulate what temperature they want to be. So you don't want to have it all hot or all cold. You want to have different temperature so they can regulate it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So yeah, when you're setting up your brooder, you don't want the heat source to be right in the middle. You want it to be set to the side so that they have those zones Peter was talking about.
You always want to keep the bedding fresh. We use fine shavings. Those work really well. Some people use hay. There's other options there. I don't like hay because it's hard to clean up and it gets messy really fast.
But different things will work for different people. So.
Yeah.
Let's see, and we're going to continue talking more about housing and things, the feed and water and bedding. Real quick, I wanted to touch on the hardening off. What we mean by that is when you transition the chicks from the brooder to their regular housing for the rest of their lifetime, there will be a period where you want to kind of ease them into it. So that bottom right photo there, you can see we've opened up the brooder door. And so that opens out into another bigger area. And for maybe a day or two, we'll keep the heat on so that it is warmer in there, but it's escaping. And then they can and we'll put the feed and the water outside the brooder, and that will entice them to come out more. And they're curious, so they'll come out. But then maybe at night, they'll go back into the heat. And then after a few days, then we'll turn the heat off, and they'll still have this space to go in between until eventually they're moved entirely into the outer space outside of the brooder.
If you don't have the ability to just let them out of the brooder into, like if your brooder's in a spot where you can't just let them out, just brood them a little longer so they get a little bigger. We let them out pretty early, like 2 weeks. So really, this just allows us to let them outside earlier.
I figured out how to open my chat on top of all these other windows, so I got distracted.
Yeah,
yes.
Wood chips aren't good. Shavings are good.
Yeah, the shavings, they're more absorbent.
As a base layer, wood chips are good if you're doing like an outdoor run or something in the winter. And then, so we put wood chips down and then leaves down, maybe 6 to 12 inches deep, and then we'll put shavings on top of it.
And we found that gives off a little bit of heat close to the ground, which is nice. But I'm not sure if people will be raising their meat chickens in the winter in this group.
That's just chickens in general.
Chickens in general. And yeah, and like I said, things will be different for everyone. You ask a farmer a question about anything, and 10 different farmers will give you 20 different answers. So let's see, I think we're ready for the next one. So a little more about housing. This is an example of what we do on our scale, which will be different from a backyard scale. But you can see on that lower right photo, we've got our large hoop house. That one is stationary. And then the one on the right, it actually moves around on the pasture. What do you call it?
It's a schooner, yeah. So it's 20 by 40 feet, and there's 500 chickens in there.
And you can see in the left photo, that's the inside of that schooner. And so the feeders and the waters are hanging so that you can just move the entire unit and it'll all move for you. And then they'll have access to fresh grass.
And the way we do it is we pull a third of the batch a week. So as they get bigger, they get more and more space.
More and more
So this
space.
is sort of like the maxed out
Yeah, this is right before we pulled to
from
harvest.
the first week. Yeah.
And-
For airflow, like having the tarp for the green one on the right picture, we propped it up so they have a lot of airflow, and the sides are open. And yeah, that moves fresh every day. If they're really destroying the grass, we can move it twice a day. By destroying the grass, I mean they just rip it up, but it comes right back even stronger.
Mhm.
But it's more you look at the smell of the space, and if it smells ammonia-y, you need to move it more. And yeah.
And for a backyard setup, I think the equivalent would be if you, depending on how many chickens you have and how much space you have, of course, you might change what they have access to over time, or you might just have a huge space that you let them run free on the whole time and they never break it all the way down because there's only so many chickens in that space.
Yeah.
So it depends on your setup, but it's something to consider. Also, the point about the airflow, I think it's important to stress that chickens are prone to respiratory problems.
Airflow is the most important.
They're
thing.
low to the ground. So what seems like it has a lot of airflow to a person who's standing up higher might not be the same for a chicken when they're lower to the ground and they're closer to all that the bedding that gets soaked in the ammonia.
And when you're testing the smell, don't do it when you're standing up. Do it when you're like filling a feeder or the water, when your nose is close to the ground.
Yeah, because it's actually quite different,
Yeah.
surprisingly.
And this structure is big and it's moved by a tractor, but you can make a small one that's 4 by 8 feet that can be pulled by hand.
Yeah, you can. I think they call them chicken tractors. There are lots of plans online, or you can just modify a shed you already have that doesn't move and just move around what grass they have access to. Yeah. Okay. So.
Oh, and that's the big structures are winter housing. Did you?
Yeah, the one on the right is stationary and it's our winter housing. So they're in there all the time in the winter. But when it gets nice out again and there's pasture, that will be their sort of nighttime housing where they get closed in at night to protect them from predators. And during the day, they'll have access to different sections of the pasture around that hoop house.
A couple acres, yeah.
Couple acres, yeah. I'm very excited for when we can let them out again. So I think for the next slide here, we have, like we mentioned, so this is actually fresh bedding on top of that mulch wood chip leaf layer that we were talking about. That's what all the brown stuff is. The chickens have already like scratched through the bedding and brought up all the leaves and wood chips.
Yeah, and I use the bags of shavings as Legos so I can adjust the airflow. So we have a big wall right there because they're small and it was cold. But if it gets warm, we can just drop a few down in certain areas. And that allows us to keep really good airflow.
And then that structure that you see in the middle there is our brooder. So the brooder is inside the hoop house. No other questions there. And then I also wanted to point out here the spread of the waters and the feeders. We have a lot of them so that the chicken really only needs to take a few steps and it'll find food or water. This is really important, especially with meat breed chickens, because they grow so quickly, so large that sometimes they are not as mobile as like a layer.
Well, and the way I do the feeders is if you need to add more, the way to tell is if the feeders are all full, then I add more so that there's always space for them. Same thing with the waters, but usually the waters, we always have way too many waters.
What do you mean the feeders are full, you add more?
When there's chickens all the way around them.
Oh, he means when they're entirely circled around. The other reason we have so many feeders is so that no chicken will have to fight for a spot. You'll see later in the more graphic photos what can sometimes happen when they get all scratched up from, and they're not even necessarily fighting, they're just scrambling to either get to food or water or the warmest spot in the middle of a huddle.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's everything on this one. So housing, of course, provides predator protection as well. And you'll want to think about aerial predators and ground predators. On those photos, you can see in the bottom right, those two photos are some sort of, I believe, a rodent that has like,
Those aren't predators, but they eat your food.
they'll eat the food. They could take the baby chicks. If they could get to the baby chicks, I think they would take them. But they are eating the grain. And so I just want to give an example here of how to spot that there may be a breach in your protection system.
And the picture with the hardware cloth on the ground going out, that was good in theory, but
The
what we should have
mistake we
done
made.
was cover it with dirt so they don't know where the hardware cloth is. But by leaving it exposed like that, they'd know where to dig.
Right. So this is a good way to predator proof. Maybe if you're converting a shed you have or something like that into a chicken coop, you can put the hardware cloth and have it extend out a foot or two and then cover it up with ground again, with soil or mulch or something, so that if a predator is trying to come into your shed, they'll just dig at the base and then they'll come to an obstruction and then stop. Fencing, we want to talk about fencing a little bit. I really like mobile fencing. I think I get it from where Premier One, or
Yeah.
I get Premier One electric netting, the mobile netting, and I usually order from Willcroft.
Yeah. That's what's behind the geese.
That's what's behind the geese in that photo. So this is actually at our home and not in Greenfield, but I mean, not in Sunderland at the farm. But I put these in because some people like to have livestock guardian animals, and there's different thoughts as to what works and what doesn't. Some people, like we've used geese, and I think that they're a great way to alert the flock when there's an aerial predator. The geese will honk, and then everyone knows to go run for cover. I've heard of people using donkeys, llamas, dogs. Dogs are a great livestock guardian animal.
And if you have hawks, the geese will actually fight the hawks.
I've actually never seen that.
There were hawk feathers all over the field.
I mean, geese are kind of sometimes scary.
Yeah.
So, are there any other livestock guardian animals that I'm forgetting about? Oh, thank you for putting in those links, Christy. That's our dog barking right now. Yeah, I think that about covers housing and predator protection.
Yeah. The fence can be charged either with a charger based off of 110 power, or there's solar chargers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you have, I think that I would recommend, if you have the option, if your coop or whatever wherever your fence is, if it's close to your house and you can just charge it through there, I think that's the best option. But if it's further away, you can use a solar charger.
Yeah, the only thing to watch with the solar, with the nets, is they ground out a lot. So you got to be really careful to keep the weeds off of them, or the battery will die.
Yeah, clearing them.
But if you're on the grid, it doesn't matter as much.
I like the security of mind if it's connected to the power.
Yeah, if you have reliable power.
But I have used solar, yeah. Okay, great. Let's see. Next we have, what time is it? Okay, we're doing okay. Equipment and materials. I've included again to think about, if you have experience raising layers, that meat chickens are a little bit different.
Messier.
They're messier. You'll need to put out more feeders and waters than you would for layers, because they're just not as mobile, especially when they get quite large. Grit is still important. You'll need the bedding. I just started listing some random tools in case there were people that have never raised chickens before, things that might be helpful. And that is by no means an exhaustive list. There's definitely more things that you can use. I have included a picture here of my backyard laying flock. Those are some Jersey Giants and I think speckled Sussex. This is from a few years ago. And you can see I've put their water up on top of an overturned dish bin just to keep the water cleaner for a little longer.
Oh, and if you have like a hose, a platoon bell water is really nice. You hook it up to the hose and then you never have to fill waters. You just have to scrub it. So that saves a lot of time.
I would, if you do have like an automatic water system though, I would recommend still checking it at least once a day.
Oh, you still check it.
Yeah, because sometimes they go haywire and then you're just having like floods and things like that. So let's see, let's go to the next. So feed and water. So we do for our birds now, mostly pasture and grain. Sometimes they get the occasional chicken scraps, as you can see in that photo in the bottom right. But it's not a regular occurrence for our chicken. There are just too many chickens and not enough chicken scraps, really. What do you want to say about pasture and grain?
I don't know. So this is like the range system, and there's the two geese that are protecting.
They're the guard geese in the middle by the water.
Those were the ones that attacked the hawk.
Those are the ones that attacked the hawk.
They fought the hawk and won.
This was before me.
There's 1,000 in that field.
How big is that field area, you think?
The whole field is like 8 acres, but that piece is maybe an acre. So there's like 4 or 5 nets. And they're definitely, they do get around. But I like to spread the feed and the water when it's in the pasture, so they go over the whole pasture.
So that they're moving, it encourages them to move around more.
Yeah. Which is a little different than the winter.
Oh, how long do you feed starter versus grower?
I just feed starter.
We just feed starter the whole way through. It's only like 7 to 8 weeks.
Yeah. But normally it's 3 weeks of starter and the rest grower. I don't really recommend feeding like we do.
The reason we do that,
Well,
so we're monitoring them all the time. We have a crew that helps us keep track of our chickens. This is what we do. The starter can be dangerous because they might put on too much. They might grow too fast, and that can cause a lot of health problems.
You just got to watch them really, really carefully.
So you need to watch them
only
closely.
feed starter.
If you're only feeding starter.
Yeah.
Like I said, they were engineered to convert feed to meat really efficiently, and so sometimes they do it a little too well, and their bodies can't handle it. So we keep a really close eye on them. Oh, there are also organic feed options. There was Green Mountain. What was the other one?
I think it's Green Mountain Feeds. They're in Vermont.
Green Mountain Feeds in Vermont.
And then there's Lakeside, Lakeview. I think Lakeview.
We don't currently feed organic to our chickens.
It's too expensive.
It's quite expensive at our scale.
For a backyard flock, it's not bad. But when you're doing thousands, it's
And for processing, we're not certified organic, but all our procedures meet organic standards. We're just not certified.
And if you're doing it yourself, doing it organic standards is really easy. You just use simple green bleach, and
that slide's coming up.
Oh, okay.
I think that's good on feed and stuff, right? So for troubleshooting, chickens can have a lot of ailments. These are just a few examples, and that photo there is a bad poop. It's quite red. That usually indicates worms to me, right? Is there anything else? They could have parasites, mites. Respiratory ailments is, I think, the one we struggle with the most.
It's just keeping lots and lots of airflow.
Right. And that's because of the number that we're raising. For a backyard flock, it likely won't be as big of a problem. But if you're raising a batch, if you decide to raise a batch or two every year, you will want to think about long-term things that will affect your soil, and then they will then affect your future flocks.
Everything clean.
Meat chickens are different from layers in that you don't have them around for as long. So some of these things might not be as big of an issue, but you do want to be careful of things that will affect the quality of your end product. And this is where your processor is really important. at least in my opinion. I don't have a lot of experience with other processors. There aren't that many. So for us, we like to give our customers feedback. If we see something, we will let them know. There's a lot more that you see on the processing end than you'll see while the chicken is, you know, pecking and eating in your yard. So that's a really important thing to keep in mind that you might want to ask about, or find a processor that really values giving feedback. Is there anything else?
Nope.
I think that's about it. Oh, there's my question slide. So next we're going to talk about your processing plan. We'll talk about when you find a processor and also process it. We'll touch on processing yourself as well. But I wanted to take a moment to stop and ask if there were questions about what we've talked about so far. I don't know how long we should wait. Were there other questions that we missed? I don't think so. Also, it's 11:47. So yeah, let's move on. Okay, so for your processing plan, someone asked about a list for processors. You'll find that on this slide. If you're planning to sell your poultry, you need to have them processed at a licensed facility. So if you want to sell as a CSA, you want to go to farmers markets, you want to sell at a restaurant, you want to sell to your friends, you'll need to find at minimum a state inspected facility. We are one of those facilities. In Massachusetts, there are 3. We're one of the 3, and those are listed on that slide. There are currently no USDA processors in Massachusetts, but hopefully we will fill that spot. We just received a grant, and so we are working towards that. So that will be our big overarching project the next couple of years. But these are the other 2 state inspected facilities you can go to. And then I've also listed a nearby USDA facility.
Oh, Buffoni's is great.
Peter has worked with Buffoni's before, and so he recommends them if you need USDA. If your chickens get processed at a USDA facility, you're then able to sell out of state. So that might be something you want to think about if you're planning to sell. And again, important, contact your processor before you get your birds. I think that's probably important for any processor, because as you can see, there are so few of them. I hate getting into the situation where someone contacts me and they want their poultry processed in like 2 weeks and they're looking for a date, but we've been booked for months. And that's a terrible situation to be in. I don't want anyone to be in that situation. Thank you. Yes, we're very excited about the grant. So yeah, so I think really important, have your processing plan in place, because you don't want to be in that position where you have birds and you can't get them processed. And then you're forced to do it yourself if you weren't planning to do that, that can be pretty daunting. There's quite a bit of equipment that's needed. So yeah, oh, thank you, Christy. So Christy's put the list in the chat because I'm going to go on to the next slide. I don't know if you want to also add that USDA place, Buffoni's. Perfect. Some things you might want to ask your processor as you're in the process of setting up your date. Their price list, cut up options. They might have different, I don't know how they might price those things differently, different packing options. The photo you see here is when we do a bulk pack. They're not individually packaged and they're just in a box with a liner. Whether they do fresh or frozen, any other fees. We charge a fee for wax boxes because that's how we store them in our walk-in after they've been processed. Pick up and drop off logistics. Sometimes there's a lot of confusion about that. And so you'll want to make sure that you do it the way the processor you're talking to wants it to be done. And again, your processor is a great source for feedback. So having a good relationship with your processor is, I think, really important. I think it's really valuable. And so this is our facility. It is all contained within a shipping container. And so that's why it's nice, long, and skinny. These photos are from both ends. You can see that there's our cone, our scalder, the plucker. We have a conveyor system for moving the chickens through the clean side. And we're going to talk about the dirty side and the clean side.
And there's a curtain that goes up.
Yes, this is after it's been cleaned after being used. We set it up, there's a plastic liner sheet that goes across to separate between the dirty side and the clean side. The dirty side is the side where there will be the most blood, feathers, and poop. And then on the clean side is when the chicken is more food looking, looks more like the food that it becomes.
Mm-hmm.
This applies for processors as well, but I've put it in the backyard processing session because when you set it up with your processor, they will tell you how they want it done. For us, we like you to remove feed 24 hours before processing. There will be a photo later to demonstrate why. And even though their food is gone, they want to still have water, and you'll want to think about some sort of holding area. For us, when we harvest our birds, this is what this photo is here. We do it at night after it's dark, so they're calmer, they're a little easier to collect, and we put them into chicken crates, which you can see piled up by the door there.
And no lights.
And no lights.
We'll use headlamps.
We use headlamps. This was when we were testing a lighting system that we're thinking of trying out for our winter raising. So yeah, you want to think of a holding area before you process your own birds, because they will move around and they won't really like being picked up. So for backyard processing, if you're going to process your own birds, I highly recommend that you find a processor to do it, because the equipment and stuff needed can be a large initial upfront cost.
But you can do it by hand.
You can do it by hand. It'll take a long time. So I think it's good to try. I've done it. And I'll talk more about how I process my chickens in my backyard in the past. But for setting up your own space, you're going to want that dirty side and that clean side. And you're going to want to avoid cross-contamination. Like I said, that dirty side is where the feathers, the poop, stuff on the outside of the chicken. And then the clean side is when you're dealing with more of the inside, and you don't want those things to mix. So something we use for sanitization is a bleach solution.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say is like the ratio of that solution?
It's like a cap full to a gallon. It's 50 to 100 parts per million.
Mm-hmm. And you're going to want to make sure you sanitize things that you might not automatically think to sanitize. Your tools, your equipment, working surfaces, the people. I will often wash all the way up to my elbows like I'm a surgeon. Aprons, depending on what you're using. Whatever the chicken is going to touch, or what you will touch while you're handling the chicken, you're going to want to sanitize. So for the dirty side, these are like things you need and sort of the parts and the steps for each side. We use cones. I have in the past used a feed bag that I cut the corner out and hung that up on a post and put the poultry in there. And so you'll put the poultry in there. Oh, we're going to start getting a little more graphic now, just as like a warning to anyone who's in the room, in case you don't really want to hear all these details. So we'll put and then out of that hole of the cone or the bag, that's when you make your cut. And then after the death throes have passed and the chicken is passed, you'll put the chicken in the scalder or the poultry. And I've written temperature here.
You can also use a turkey pot filled with hot water. You just want it to be 147 to 150 degrees. So you'll want a thermometer.
Yes, and so I've written temperature here because that's really important, and you'll want to keep a close eye on it. You want to maintain the temperature, and you may also need to adjust the temperature, because depending on what you're processing, if it's bigger or older or different breeds, those could all require a change in that temperature.
And the way you know it's the bird is ready after coming out of the scalder is when you can easily pull a wing feather. And
then they'll go in the plucker. We have a large drum plucker. You could do it by hand. I've had a drill attachment that was like, it had like rubber fingers attached to it that spun and feathers went everywhere, but that's what I used at one point. There are a couple different options for pluckers. And then on the clean side, these are the steps you're going to need to have happen for your chicken or poultry to become food. So you'll do, and there's a video at the end showing all this, but I wanted to put it after the warning slide. So you'll want to cut the neck, free the crop and the esophagus, because those will be attached with connective tissue down the side of the neck. There's an oil gland on the tail you want to remove. You'll remove the head. You'll gut the poultry, taking out the insides, making sure you grab that crop and esophagus and pull that through on the other side. You'll separate the organs, the ones you want to keep and discard. You remove the neck and you remove the feet. And then you'll have a broiler chicken like you buy in the grocery store. After the chicken has now been all cleaned out, you'll then rinse it really well, and then you'll chill it. The important thing here with chilling is it needs to get under 40 degrees within 4 hours.
And also stirring the tank. So you can't just put them in the tank and let them be. We stir them a few times so that we make sure that they're all getting the same cold water. Because sometimes if it's a really big bird, it'll heat up the water around it.
And melt the ice, and then it won't be getting as cold as fast as you need it to. I've seen YouTube videos where people put it in a big garbage bin because they only have a few birds. If you do something like that, just make sure you have a lot of ice and a lot of water to move the ice.
Double the ice you think you need.
Double the ice you think you need, and be ready to add more ice as it melts.
A good ballpark is 5 pounds of ice per bird if it's a 4 to 5 pound bird. So it's basically pound of meat, pound of ice.
And there are lots of YouTube videos out there about backyard processing, and some of them are great. A lot of them don't mention this important 40 degrees within 4 hours, and that keeps, I mean, you want it to be food safe because you want to eat the meat. So, and then for packing and storage, you can pack it in a bag in what do you call those, poly bags?
Yeah, poly bags. Yeah. So different size bags, different size birds. You can vacuum seal bags too.
Whatever you do, if you put it in a bag and then freeze it, one nice backyard trick is after you put it in, if you have a big container of water, you dunk the bag with the poultry in it into the water, and it kind of pushes all the air out. Don't let the opening fall under the water surface. And then you can like twist it closed, and a lot of the air will have come out, and that will help avoid any freezer burn. And then for storage, how long is it good in the fridge? If you don't freeze it, you just put the chicken in the fridge.
In a cooler, it's about a week is good. Week to 10 days, but a fridge is warmer.
And then if you put it in the freezer?
Yeah. Freezer up to a year.
Yeah, 6 months to a year.
Yeah, a year's pushing it.
A year is pushing it. And of course, like the more air and stuff that's in the bag, the sooner you'll want to eat it. Okay, so here is my warning slide. There are some graphic photos and a video. So I wanted to give people a moment to opt out if they didn't want to see that. And I think after this, it basically touches on everything we've already talked about. And I don't think there's any new information except, you know, the visual cue of some of the things we've talked about. And then, so yeah, I think I've probably given enough people time to leave if they wanted to. So the next slide here is a video. This is Peter doing all the clean side stuff of the processing that we talked about. He's very, very fast. I just want to note that he's very fast, and most people cannot do it at this speed. And just a note that if you can't do it this fast, that's normal. So let me play this. So you can see this is the neck cut. He reaches in onto the left side and scoops out the esophagus and the crop. That's cutting off the tail, the oil gland. Then he cuts the feet. Now he's making the incision around into the chest cavity and then around that butthole, so that when you pull everything out, that whole digestive tract remains whole, and you just pull it all out cleanly from the bird. And that dangling part you see there was the esophagus. Here's a nice liver and heart. And it was very fast, but Peter pulled out the lungs and everything in one clean pull, which is also very difficult. The lungs kind of, they nestle into the ribs in the back. And so they're actually not actually as easy to pull out as Peter makes it look. All right, so next slide. Were these heritage birds?
No,
Okay.
that's what happens when you don't remove the food.
So this here is what happens when you don't remove feed 24 hours beforehand. You get a crop incredibly full of food, and it's really hard. You can't do the pull it through the whole chicken so that everything remains clean. This is my hand holding that crop there. You can't pull that through. So you have to cut it off. And even if you cut it off, this whole tract is now full of food, and it's going to leave little bits of food as you pull it through the bird. And it's really hard to clean off because of all that connective tissue. So that's why you should remove feed. Was there anything else about this slide?
Oh.
I think that's pretty much it. They were just so full. Here's a few things that we have come across while processing. Sometimes the bird gets a cut. So you can see that on the left and the right there are cuts that have gotten infected. And most likely there was like a pile up with the chickens, or, you know, they've scratched each other in some way. And so they get infected, and you don't always see that when it's covered in feathers.
These aren't our birds.
Oh yeah, these aren't our birds. Peter wants me to point out. So they also sometimes get cuts.
Not like that.
Not like this. That's true. We do the best we can to make sure that those things don't happen. That's why we have so many feeders. That's why we have so much space. We keep an eye on them to make sure that those things don't happen. But this is something that, like I was mentioning before, this is something your processor will see and that you might not necessarily see. That middle photo is a bad leg. Sometimes the joints, because they grow so fast so quickly, their joints can't quite handle it. So that's something we'd have to cut off. This here is a gizzard that is fine, except that it's instead of grit, it's full of compacted grass. And so that's just to illustrate how important grit is. We had noticed that this batch of birds, also not ours, were on the small side for how old they were. And then so we decided to cut open this gizzard and take a closer look at what was going on. And we realized it's probably because they either didn't have grit or didn't have enough grit. And so they weren't able to grind up their food as efficiently. And so we think that might be why they were on the smaller side. This next slide here is a bad liver. There is a gizzard in the bottom corner there, but the liver you can see there is discolored and like spotted looking. And then on the right, we realized as we were pulling photos, we really don't take pictures of what's right. We really only take pictures when there's something wrong so that we can send that to the customer and say, hey, this is what we found, just so you know what's going on. But I did include a photo of some of our packaged livers that we sell. And so you can see there, the color is uniform. It's nice and dark. They were probably even darker when we first pulled them. This is after they've been chilled and packaged. So they lose a little bit of color in that process, but they're uniform and they don't have that sort of spotted texture look. And that was the last one. Let's see, if you can share info like that with, yes. So we think it's really important to share that information. And so that's why we take photos as we go. If there's something wrong, we want you to know so that you know for your next batch, if there's something going on with your soil, if there's something going on with your methods, maybe some equipment you're using. We've had people housing chickens in something that wasn't ideal, and then it affected the end product. And so we don't want you to make that same mistake again. So we'll let you know. I think we can open to questions. I'm happy to go back to other slides or replay that video that was really fast because Peter has been doing this for years and years and is super speedy. I also wouldn't mind seeing people's faces if they wanted to. So yeah, you can put your question in chat, or you can unmute and just ask your question. I'm happy to go back over things. I know it's a very quick, pretty quick overview, but we're happy to provide more tailored information if we know a little more of your experience and what you're working with, essentially. What causes the bad liver? That a lot of things can cause a bad liver. So the liver functions just like ours. It cleans things out. So if the chicken was sick, if it had one of those respiratory ailments and the liver just couldn't, it just was too much for the liver to handle. Any other infection, anything else?
It's the filter.
Yeah, it's the filter for the body. So if the chicken is dealing with anything, and it's just too much for the liver, it'll cause the liver to go bad.
And if it's a really bad spotted liver, throw the bird out. You don't want to eat it.
Yeah, that's fine to not be on video. I understand.
We recommend they're poultry crates. They're plastic crates. They're like 3 by 2 feet.
So for everyone else, if you're not looking at the chat, the question is how to transport your backyard flock for processing. We recommend a poultry crate, and we do have some for rent. They're kind of expensive if you're only using it sometimes. You might want to just rent one.
Yeah, dog crates aren't great because the dog kennels, they work, but you could fit a lot of chickens in them, but they'll pile up and they're really hard to get out. So we don't recommend those.
Because of the height it allows. So a poultry crate is shorter. It won't let them pile up on top of each other. It's also easier to get the chicken out of it. And it really streamlines our day if we just have poultry crates to deal with instead of having to climb into a dog crate to pull out the last chicken.
And it's also for transport. If you have a small truck or an SUV, you can put
you can
crates,
layer them.
You can stack them up. You can move a lot more chickens in a lot less space. In the summer, you want to put less birds per crate. So maybe 5 or 6 birds a crate because it gets really hot, but you don't want them overheating. In the winter, you can pack more in there. But that's really important not to overpack the crates because they'll overheat and die. And
they'll actually die, and we'll find dead chickens in the crate, which is really unfortunate. And it might have just been from heat, and that chicken cannot then be processed for meat.
And it can happen really fast if they're overcrowded.
And we've also had people try to bring them in a dog crate, like a plastic one that has the bottom is all solid and then the top has the vents. Those are also not great because the poultry is down low.
No airflow. And
we've had chickens just dead from no air. So that's unfortunate. So really the poultry crate is the best way to go. Yeah. Oh, so let's see. Sorry, not on video. Bad liver. Oh, okay. I think those are all the questions so far. Any other questions? I can also go out of this view, gallery view.
I had a question. It may be different for backyard processing versus the size of processing you were doing, but what do you do with all the byproducts?
Oh, right
Great
now
question.
it goes in a compost dumpster. So we have a weekly pickup of a compost dumpster, a couple yards a week. We do want to compost it though. So you can make a pile of wood chips or shavings and manure, and then you just want to bury it 2 or 3 feet deep. So that's our plan for this year. Because it's really good stuff.
Yeah, it will make great compost. Yeah, it's trickier for a backyard processor. And depending on where you are, wherever you bury it, you might want to put something real heavy or something on top because the animals will want to come and scavenge.
I think if you had one of those, the black tubs, and you buried them deep enough, it would be okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. It does smell though.
It is poop and stuff. That's another reason why I think it's easier to go to a processor. They'll take care of all that. You just bring them you raise the birds, You bring them the birds, and then you just get back something you're going to put in your freezer or fridge.
But everyone should do it at least once.
It's quite the experience. Yeah. It took me, let's see, the first time I processed in my backyard, it took me all day to do 20. So there is that. But I think if I had done it again after that first time, I would have been faster, because that was my first time processing. And oh, I wanted to say for the plucker, plucking might be the thing that takes the longest if you're doing it by hand or doing it in your backyard, other than the technical parts of cleaning out the chicken.
But if you get the scald right, it's not bad.
If you get the scald right, it's not bad, which is why it's important to look at that temperature. And also, I think that there are lots of different farming and backyard farm communities where they go in on something like a big drum plucker, like what we have in our facility. And then you can maybe join. I think sometimes it's like a membership, and then you join, and then you're able to use that plucker, or there are a couple of different options around that.
But you can have the best picker in the world, and if you don't scald it,
If
it
you don't
won't do
scald it right,
anything.
it won't pull
Yeah.
those feathers off. That scalder temperature is really important. So we have ducklings, and they're adorable, and I'm excited to see how it turns out. We did start a YouTube channel. I would love to reach 100 subscribers so we could have a custom URL instead of just a string of letters. So if anyone has YouTube and you'd like to follow a farm account, you can find us. I think the link will be somewhere, and you can also search Reed Farm Poultry and we'll pop up. Do you provide a pond or pool for the ducklings? So this is our first batch of ducklings. I think for the winter we won't, but I hope we continue to raise them, and in nicer weather they will have a pool, because I love watching them in the pool. We do have some ducks at home. We have some runner ducks, and they have a pool that they splash and play around in. The thing about ducklings and geese is they make them, you can wash out their pool, refill it, and in 5 minutes it's just as dirty as right before you cleaned it. So it's quite a lot of maintenance, but they are a joy to watch in a pool. They love it so much. And if you do ducklings on your own, don't give them access to water like that until they get feathers in. If you did, they'll play in it, but they'll get really cold, and I think it's better to just wait till they have their waterproofing and their feathers.
Are you just raising pecans, or are you doing any smaller breeds?
Right now, just pecans for the farm, but at home I have runner ducks.
Oh, you said that, yeah.
Yeah, I have like an assortment of colors. I love having different color ducks, and they're runners, so they're upright and cute.
Do you have to clip the runner's wings? I know like mallards you do, but
I haven't ever done that before. These guys are young. I only got them this past late in the summer.
Our chickens live in a tree. The layers.
We have layers at home as well, and I can't get them back in their coop. They just shoot straight up, super high up into the pine tree in our backyard, and I can't get them down. So I don't know what I'm gonna do. We've just been, so far it's been okay. We've lost one, but everyone, I don't know.
They get 20 feet up in a tree.
Yeah, there's really, I mean, they've made their choice, haven't they?
Yeah.
they're living their best life.
Yeah. And because we have so many meat chickens, I still marvel at how agile they are. Like, meat chickens can't do that. They can't jump nearly anything.
They can jump a foot.
Maybe, and like risk hurting themselves.
One hay bale or one
They can jump up on a
bale.
shaving bale. Yeah, that's true.
I had one more question about your fencing. I'm sorry if I missed you saying it, but have you had trouble with birds getting stuck in the electronet?
The first day you got to watch them really closely.
They don't learn really quickly though.
Yeah, that can be an issue. So when we do that, we watch them for a long time until they figure out not to run into it. But yeah,
Usually within the first day.
Yeah, never turn on a fence and leave it for the first day, because you'll come back and they'll be dead. Because they do get stuck, and also have the turn off switch really close by, so you can turn it off and get them out.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're too small, they'll just run right through it.
And then they'll learn to just do that, even once they've gotten bigger and they can't fit right through. So it's best not to let them learn that.
Do you have a preferred source for chicks or ducklings?
Oh yeah.
For home stuff, we use McMurray.
McMurray is nice for a small. They have a minimum of 6, and they do also offer meat chickens. They have a really actually impressive broad range for being able to provide smaller batches of birds.
And
So
then
they're great.
for the commercial chickens, we use Moyers. They're out of Pennsylvania. And then for the ducks, we use Metzer, which is in California.
Yeah, there aren't as many people selling ducklings on a commercial scale, so we have to go further away for that.
But the chickens come
From
by
Pennsylvania?
Pennsylvania, and they deliver them.
They deliver them straight to us. And if anyone is interested in doing a larger batch of chickens, that might be a good place to go to.
Oh, yeah. They do large scale, and it's cheaper than anywhere else.
Mm-hmm. But if you wanted to maybe do a mix, like you wanted to get a couple layers to add to your flock and you just want to try like, I don't know, like 12 meat chickens just to give it a try, then you might want to do McMurray.
Yeah.
Because they have a low minimum.
There's Meyer too.
Oh yeah, Meyer is good too.
Yeah.
Did you say Moyer, M-O-Y-E-R?
Yeah.
And Meyer, M-E-Y-E-R?
Yeah, they all start with M. I get them confused all the time.
All the hatcheries, all 4 of them are.
Oh, hi, Steve. Thank you for subscribing to our YouTube. It's nice to see you here. We met Steve earlier this year.
We'll put a link to your YouTube channel in the description for this video also.
That would be amazing. It's impossible to remember. It's just it's like the whole alphabet all jumbled up.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. I learned a lot and we really appreciate you being here.
Oh, good. Thank you. It's really an honor. I've come to lots of NOFA things and I've really admired all the speakers. So it's really exciting to be like, oh, I'm a speaker now.
Put that on your resume. All right. Well, best of luck with your new adventures and your grant, and you'll be our first USDA processing plant for poultry, hopefully.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.